Hello. For this lecture, we're going to be talking about the Neolithic Revolution and the development of states. The Neolithic Revolution is the beginning of agriculture, plant and animal domestication. All of our earlier ancestors were foragers, people who lived by collecting wild plants and hunting. They did not grow their own food. Humans survived for millions of years as foragers. We started domesticating our first animals about 20,000 years ago with dogs. Then we began to domesticate many more plants and animals. Domestication, it's the process of adapting plants and animals for human use. It is also when we take a species bred in captivity and we modify it from its wild ancestors. The pictures show you wild corn. Now on the left, you can see the wild corn, the cobs and actual seeds are very small. Foragers for thousands of years were selecting the best seed size and allowing those to repopulate the plant. And what they did is slowly start to transform the plant until we have the large corn kernels of today. There were 5 main centers of domestication throughout the world. They are northern China, Indus Valley, the Middle East, Mexico, and Peru. This is a map of the 5 major centers of domestication. There were many other areas that were secondary centers of domestication, and agriculture spread quite rapidly. Now, agriculture created a high-calorie food supply and also created surplus food, but stored foods could grow scarce before the new harvest, and poor crops could lead to mass starvation. On the left is a man in an agricultural field harvesting large amounts of food for his family and other people. There is a surplus. On the right, we see the skeletal face of a child between the ages of 10 and 12. If you look closely at the child's teeth, you can see that there's 4 lines on the front teeth. What those are indications of periods of either very low nutrition or starvation. This child experienced periods in its development where the body could not continue to grow due to lack of food or nutrients. And we can see signs of these nutritional deficiencies in their teeth. This is an example of a person who has iron deficiency anemia. Farmers became dependent on less than a dozen plants, leading to nutritional problems. We still have this problem today in our society. We have a high-calorie, high-fat diet, but oftentimes it lacks essential nutrients and vitamins. When your body lacks certain nutrients, it will go and scavenge those nutrients from the bone. And we can see here it scavenged iron. This is a partial list of animals that were domesticated. We have here wild and domesticated pig, wild and domesticated sheep, cows, and goats. We also domesticated different types of birds. What I would like you to remember about animal domestication is that in the old world, this is the location where most of the animals were domesticated, this entire list here. In the New World, fewer animals were domesticated. We have the dog like we have throughout the world. We also have the turkey. A few other cultures domesticated other animals as well. We'll talk about the Inca later and their domestication of different animals. But there's a big difference between the Old World and the New World in terms of domestication. New World has few domesticated animals, the Old World has many. The New World, however, has higher nutrient and more diverse plant foods than the Old World. And people probably had a diet more focused on plant foods. This created diseases that are shared by animals and humans. This is called zoonosis. When humans domesticated animals, they started living and working closely with these animals. This allowed the disease, the parasites, the ticks and fleas to transfer from the animals to the humans, oftentimes causing disease. And most of our major plagues are from this close domesticated relationship we had with animals. Smallpox is an old world disease that killed a majority of children, and it killed hundreds of millions of people in our prehistory. It's a very deadly disease. We now have a vaccination for it and have not had a case of smallpox for many decades. The early problems in the Neolithic were social inequality and poor health. Remember, foragers had social equality. They were egalitarian. Foragers also had a diet that had a lot of variety and a lot of nutrients. It was high in nutrients and low in fat. So let's look at the Neolithic or the farming people. First off, their life expectancies fall below that of foragers. Infant mortality kills most children. Part of that is due to the low nutritional food and also due to the diseases that people are experiencing. Populations suffer from nutritional deficiencies and starvation. Also, violence and warfare spreads throughout the world. Foragers had some violence and even some warfare, but it is somewhat rare. Neolithic people become very violent, and you see warfare worldwide. Good agricultural lands had to be protected, and people do not share the wealth. We start to see inequalities in wealth among the Neolithic. Whole villages and towns are massacred. Murder and violence become more common. On the left is a mass murder, prehistoric one. People were thrown into a pit and buried. On the right is an example of someone's skull after they've been hit in the head with a club. It tends to crack open the skull. One of the earliest cities, 6,000 years ago, was recently uncovered in Ukraine. The houses were made of wood and clay, and the people appeared to have equal status and material possessions. The development of cities. There's 10 attributes that led to the development of cities. The first is agricultural surplus. This feeds a growing population, which is the second one. Population pressure. People start to have more children and populations grow. The third is trade networks. In larger population areas, you need to bring in items from a distance, items for cooking your food, your energy, but also food and other resources. The fourth is social stratification, and this is inequality. You see some people becoming wealthier than others. The fifth is centralized governments. Systems developed to control the larger populations. The sixth is supernatural origins of the ruler. The seventh is large architectural projects. This is when you start to get pyramids and cities developing. 8 is the development of writing or record keeping. In almost all cities, there was a form of taxation to bring wealth to the elites, and you had to keep track of who was paying their taxes. The ninth is craft specialization. You now have parts of the population relying on farmers for their food and not having to do farm work. So what this population turns to is certain craft specialization. They make pottery, they may make pieces of art or weaponry. The 10th is inventions. We see huge amounts of new inventions in these early cities. For our discussion about cities and states, we're going to focus on the Inca Empire. This will allow us to see cultural differences from our own state. Agricultural surplus led to higher populations and eventually to the formation of states. Like many civilizations across the world, the Inca depended on the inventions and infrastructure of earlier cultures. For the Inca, one of those cultures was the Nazca culture. The Nazca developed an irrigation system that would feed the waters from the mountain into the desert. They marked this irrigation system with a set of very large symbols called the Nazca Lines. The Nazca Lines can only be viewed from an airplane. They are just giant outlines of animals. Below them lies an underground irrigation system that is remarkable in its ability to bring water to this desert. It is a system that has lasted for centuries and can still operate today. This is one Nazca irrigation system marker. This monkey was used as a ritual area as well. It shows you one area of the irrigation system built by the Nazca to bring water down. This area is open for cleaning the water system. They had tunnels that workers went into the tunnels to keep the water flowing, clear out all the debris and sediments that were building in the tunnels. They turned this desert into productive farmland. I have been to many deserts throughout the world, and I have to say the Peruvian desert is one of the driest deserts in the world. Almost no plants grow on it. But if you look in the background, you can see what water has done to this desert. It's turned it into a Garden of Eden. The most important crop of early Peruvian civilizations was cotton. They grew cotton through much of the desert of Peru. The empires of Peru were built on cotton. Their innovation often focused on weaving and textiles. Here we have two examples of early Nazca textiles, beautifully woven. The people were able to spin very fine cotton and weave it into beautiful, intricate textiles with vivid colors. I wanted to show you this because I think it shows you how important cotton was to the Nazca people and the Inca as well. Cotton was wealth. This is a high status male who was buried surrounded by layer after layer of cotton. He was wrapped in 300 pounds of cotton. He was also buried with his child. We can see kind of a cross section of his burial. Here he is in the center. He is placed in a fetal position. He has a beautiful feather headdress. The feathers are from parrots from the Amazon. He's also been given foods and wrapped in layer after layer of blankets and rock cotton. And you can see his child in the far left area. The child has also been wrapped in blankets and given food items. This is a map of the Inca Empire. It is located on the west coast of South America. It grew quickly and basically covered thousands of miles. The Inca Empire was connected by over 15,000 miles of roads, now called the Inca Trail. These roads are not built for wagons. The Inca had wheels for toys, but did not use carts or any wheeled vehicles to transport merchandise. These are basically footpaths. This 15,000-mile trail system stretched up and down the Inca Empire through the mountains, and a second trail system along the coastal region. There were many interlocking trails. They also had outposts where runners lived who could carry messages throughout the empire very quickly. You can see here that they built the trails sometimes through very difficult environments. The Inca developed the first suspension bridge. This is an engineering marvel which allowed them to traverse very rugged areas and very fast, dangerous waters. They developed a system of weaving grasses. Local people would gather once a year, harvest the grasses, and weave ropes, and then together they would weave the new bridge. I think this sort of shows you how important the Inca thought of weaving and using materials to create woven products. You can see how this would enable people walking through these trails to cross very fast and dangerous rivers safely. They are a little bit scary to walk on, I do have to say that. Now, the Inca practiced a mortarless architecture. This architecture was designed to be very stable in an environment that had earthquakes. Here you can see examples of that beautiful masonry. The rocks were brought down from the quarry and they were carved in place. They're very much like a Lego system. Hidden behind the rocks are pegs and holes, so they fit in and interlocked with one another. If an earthquake struck this area, the rocks would move and sometimes they might come out of the peg, sort of the Lego system, but the entire wall would remain stable and fall back into place once the movement of the earth stopped. This is a palace called Machu Pichu. It's high up in the Andean mountains. It was built for an emperor as a place to worship both the Inca sun god and also the mountain gods. The Incas' main god was the sun god. They were polytheistic and had other gods. Gold was often presented to the sun god because of its ability to reflect light. So you see a lot of gold objects in their worship. The Incas also worshiped their mountains. They're incredibly beautiful mountains, oftentimes over 10,000 feet in height. This is an altar to the mountain gods that's located in Machu Picchu. Inca had a system of writing that was based on fiber and textiles. It's called the quipu. Here's two examples. The fibers could be read according to their thickness of the fiber themselves, the color of the fiber, but also if you look closely, different points along the fiber are knotted. We have yet to be able to translate the quipus we now have in museums. Attempts are being made. One of the most interesting things I found with the Inca was their storage facilities throughout their empire. During this time period, the Inca considered it very important to be able to feed their entire population. In this area of the world, they experience extreme weather cycles every 7 years. It'll be periods of drought followed by periods sometimes of hard rains. In past cultural systems, this often led to massive starvation and long periods of hardship. So the Inca decided to deal with it by developing a massive storage system for their food. Almost everywhere you go into the empire, you see large buildings with storage. They would have stored food and other goods for the local people, but also for their military and tradespeople. You, as a member of the Inca Empire, would look up and you would know that your empire could provide you food if you needed it. The Inca were also experimental in their agriculture. They tried to develop different types of plants that could grow in different areas of the empire. Their empire stretched from the seacoast and the dry deserts along the coast to the high mountains, extremely different environments and extremely different growing periods and frost cycles. So they developed different types of plants to grow in all of those regions. This right here is actually an experimental agricultural area designed and used by the Inca. You can look down on it, see how beautiful it is. This is a picture that shows you some of the varieties of the potato. The ancestors of the Inca domesticated the potato, and over a period of hundreds and hundreds of years, they developed many, many different types of potatoes for the many different types of environments in South America. They also did the same for corn. What they're trying to do is make sure that regardless of the weather or the environment, the people will have some crop. They also developed a domesticated animal called the alpaca. These animals are used for food, but also their fur is used for weavings. The Inca developed a way to clean water through a series of waterfalls and sand traps. They would funnel water high up from the mountains and let it go through various waterfalls and sand traps to clean it. So most people in the Inca Empire had very clean water. If you look at the cities and towns, people also had baths and sewage facilities. The Inca loved color, and you can see that in the colors they select for their cottons and their alpaca. It's beautiful and very bright. Let's talk a little bit about Inca warfare. The Inca had huge armies, often numbering as many as 100,000. They used that army to conquer other people, but also just to threaten them. And I wanted to show you some of their equipment they used for warfare. Now, the clothing that these men are wearing is actually tightly woven cotton in multiple layers. So it's so tightly woven and there's so many layers compacted together that it actually works as a type of armor for them. They can embed stones into the weavings as well for additional protection. But if you threw a spear at these men, the fabric would be resistant to the spearhead. You can also see the other types of weapons they use: spears, axes, and also clubs. This slide shows you a surgical technique used by the Inca. If you were to get a brain injury today, you would go to the hospitals and surgeons might remove part of your skull to open up and allow your injured brain to swell. When your brain stops swelling and goes back to normal size, the surgeons would replace that bone, sew you up, and you'd be fine. The Inca were trying to do the same thing 500 years ago with people who had brain injuries. They would go in, remove part of the bone, and allow the brain to swell outside of the skull. Unfortunately for them, they could not replace the bone. They could not keep it alive. So they just sewed up the person, and the person had to live their life with a section of their skull removed and just covered by skin. On the right, you can see several of the people in this photo had this operation, but also survived it for some time. The wound has become rounded and the bone is healing. The person on the left did not survive. You can see how clean those cuts are and how sharp they are. So there was no bone healing. Now, the Inca Empire spread north to south, up and down the coast of South America. What they would oftentimes do is they would find a neighboring civilization and they would invite them to join the empire. This invitation had the threat of military warfare behind it. But many people decided to forego the military battles and they joined the empire. If you did that, you and your people were treated fairly well by the Inca. If you decided not to join the Inca Empire and they conquered you, what they would do is they would take the people of your civilization and they would force them into these forced labor camps and indoctrinate them into Inca culture, language, and religion. What we have pictured here is a fishing dormitory. People lived in this dormitory and they processed fish and dried fish for the Inca Empire. So it was an indoctrination forced labor camp here. The Inca had large amounts of gold and silver. In their mountains, there are places that have many gold mines even today. The Inca used the gold for clothing, they even wove it, and they used it for art. If you wanted to be fashionable and you were an elite among the Inca, you might have your skull shaped by your parents. What parents would do after you were born is they would bound your head, compress it either with boards or fabric, giving you an attractive cone shape. This was highly prized by the Inca. This is a sacrificial victim from the 1500s. Please note how well preserved she was. She was a young woman who was chosen to be sacrificed at the top of the mountain. We believe that the period before this, that she was treated as a goddess and then taken up to the very top of a mountain, a height of like 13,000 feet above sea level, where she was given an alcohol and drug to make her fall asleep. She was then strangled by the priest and left at the top of the mountain. Because the mountain is so cold and her body was buried by snowfall very quickly, it preserved her for hundreds of years. This is just to show you how our foods have changed. Most of the corn eaten in the Inca Empire would have been either deep red or deep blue. They did have some yellow corn, but the corn was not designed to be boiled and eaten like we eat corn today. It was mostly designed to be dried and stored and turned into meal. Now, if you look on the right, that's the white corn that we in America are very fond of. The left is the more traditional Indian corn. And if you look on the far left, you can see the nutrient content rating of the different corns. Blue corn has a nutrient content of 99.5. Down at the bottom is the white corn that we eat, and it has a nutrient value of 1.54. And again, this happens with carrots as well. Purple or yellow carrots have a nutrient value of 38.69. Orange carrots have a nutrient value of 2.34. In general, the more colorful your foods, the higher their nutrition. So if you can pick purple vegetables, those are higher in nutrition than whites or yellows. Here's the final example. In Peru, many of the potatoes are colored blues and reds. Very few have a yellow or white color. The Peruvian potato has a nutrient value of 171. The Yukon Gold of 5.45. So purple potato is so much more nutritious than the potatoes we eat today in the United States.